I reserved a table for 6 candles lit, wine poured, and hope still breathing. But when the only thing that arrived was a gift I gave last Christmas, rewrapped and handed back to me, I realized this wasn't forgetfulness. This was erasure. If you've ever felt like the backup plan in your own family, this story might just give you the courage to stop begging for a seat and build your own table instead. Evelyn Blake sat alone at a table set for 6. The restaurant was small. The kind of place with soft amber lighting and white tablecloths that didn't pretend to be anything they weren't. The kind of place you chose when you wanted something to feel special without feeling extravagant. She had picked it carefully, a warm little bistro tucked into a side street in Denver, where the wine was always poured generously and the waiters never rushed you out. She wore a long-sleeved olive green dress. It wasn't flashy, but it hugged her waist just right. And the sleeves brushed against her skin like soft reminders. You made an effort. The hostess had smiled when she walked in. "Party of 6, she asked. And Evelyn nodded, smoothing her napkin over her lap. "Yes, Blake. I made the reservation last week." The table was near the window, just enough distance from the other diners to create the illusion of privacy. Candles flickered in low glass holders, casting little shadows across the silverware. The wine glass in front of her was already half full, a rich red that caught the light like a secret waiting to be kept. She checked the time again. 6:47 m. Still nothing. She told herself not to look worried. She adjusted her fork, then her napkin, then her phone. They'll come. They're just running late. Her sister was always 5 more minutes. Her brother had never been on time for anything in his life. And her mother, well, her mother arrived early only for other people's events. But this was Evelyn's, her 34th birthday. And she had wanted it to be simple. Not the Pinterest perfect kind. Not a big party or a dramatic surprise. Just 6 chairs, 6 plates, and a few glasses of wine. A few stories shared. A toast, a nod that her presence mattered. That she belonged in a room where people showed up for her. The waiter appeared, all kindness and subtle awkwardness. "Would you like to wait a bit longer to order?" Or, she interrupted before he could finish. "I'll wait." Her voice was a little too quick, a little too rehearsed. He gave a gentle nod and walked away, leaving her with the stillness that had begun to buzz. She scrolled through her phone. Spun emails. A coupon from a store she no longer shopped at. A notification from her calendar that simply read, "You made it to 34. Dottie." She had written that to herself 3 days ago. Then the screen lit up again. It was a text from her mother. 13 words. That was all. "You're not our priority right now. Enjoy your dinner." She stared at it for a long time, her fingers hovering as if they might magically type a reply that didn't ache. No happy birthday. No explanation. Just finality wrapped in civility. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was deliberate. It was loud in its absence. And in that moment, she knew this night would not be remembered for who came. It would be remembered for who chose not to. A few minutes later, the waiter returned, a small box in his hands. "This was dropped off earlier for you," he said. "They asked me to bring it over during your dinner." She blinked, managing the kind of smile you wear like armor. "Thanks." The box was wrapped in minimalist gold paper. Matte. Not ribbon. Just clean lines. perfectly creased corners. She already knew who had wrapped it. Zinnia, her sister, was militant about packaging. Evelyn peeled the tape slowly. Not because she cared to savor it, but because her fingers didn't know what else to do. Inside was a pale blue silk scarf. Soft. Familiar. Too familiar. She had bought this scarf for her mother last Christmas. She remembered every detail. The brand stitched along the edge. The exact hue that reminded her of winter mornings in Aspen. The snag on one corner where her mother had caught it on her ring during church. It was the same scarf. Not just a copy. The exact one. Underneath it lay a card. Happy birthday from all of us. But there was something beneath those new words. Faint. Ink from a previous message that hadn't quite faded completely. She tilted the card in the candlelight. She saw her own handwriting. Love you always. Mom. She had written that last year. They hadn't even bothered to use a new card. They had written over it. As if memory could be recycled. As if love could be returned like merchandise. Her hands were steady. But her breath wasn't. At the table beside hers, a couple laughed over crème brûlée. A server at the back dropped a fork. Someone was singing Happy Birthday a few tables away, soft. Off-key. But full of love. Evelyn lifted her wine glass and took a slow sip. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't even reply. There was no panic. Just a quiet collapse. She looked at the empty chairs in front of her. 6 place settings. 5 unused. 1 woman. And the realization that hit her harder than any insult they didn't forget. They simply chose someone else. That someone else was always Zinnia. Or Curtis. Or whoever needed the family spotlight more desperately than she did. Evelyn was the quiet one. The stable one. The dependable pillar who didn't need much. But today, she had asked. Just once. She had asked to be shown up for. And they didn't. Not because they couldn't. But because they didn't want to. Evelyn reached into her purse and pulled out a small sticky note. She had meant to use it for groceries, almond milk, dog food, maybe some candles. But instead, she wrote 5 words in neat block letters. Thank you. No more seats. She folded it once, placed it gently beside the gift box, and slid a $20 bill under her untouched bread plate. Then she stood, straightened her dress, and walked out into the Denver night. The sky above was dark, but not empty. The sidewalk was cool under her heels. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The table was behind her. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't begging to sit at it. The air outside smelled like lavender and traffic, an odd mix of city life and someone's attempt to soften it. Evelyn didn't head straight home. She walked. Past storefronts and cafes she didn't know the names of. Her heels clicking softly like punctuation marks in an essay no one would read. Her apartment was only 12 blocks away. But she took the long way. She wasn't avoiding anything. Or maybe she was. The empty table still floated in her mind's eye. Each unclaimed share, a small echo of something much older than tonight. She didn't feel 34. She felt 9 again. 9. Standing in the kitchen with her best dress on a cotton floral thing with tiny pockets she never used. Her hands had been sticky with anticipation. She had even helped blow up the balloons herself. Although one popped in her face and made her cry for exactly 3 seconds before she remembered to be brave. Being brave was important when you were the oldest. It was how you made yourself matter. The house had been loud that morning. But not for her. Curtis had an audition for the community play some children's version of Peter Pan, and her mother was bustling between the living room and the hallway mirror. Fixing his collar. Rehearsing his lines. Brushing his hair even though he hated that. Let Evelyn help with the balloons, her mother said, not looking at her. She's good with her hands. As if Evelyn were a hired assistant. As if her birthday weren't written on the calendar in red marker with 3 underlines and a doodle of a cake. By noon, no one had mentioned the party. By 3, her best friend Ava had called to say she couldn't come. Her parents were taking her skiing. Evelyn had said it was fine. Her voice chirpy like the cartoon characters her brother mimicked. We'll do something next week. It's not a big deal. At 5, Curtis had landed the part. He came home holding a paper crown they gave all the kids for trying. Her mom snapped a photo of him on the porch. Her smile so wide, it looked rehearsed. Evelyn had stood in the background, watching, her arms crossed, unsure what to do with the balloon string tangled around her wrist. At 6, she went to the kitchen to look for the cake. There was none. Not even a frozen one from the grocery store. Just leftover spaghetti and the tray of cheese crackers her mom kept in case neighbors dropped by. She remembered sitting on the floor, the tile cold beneath her. She didn't cry. She didn't say anything. She just untied the balloon from her wrist and let it go, watching it bump along the ceiling until it got stuck in the corner. Like, it didn't know where else to go either. She found an old cupcake in the pantry. Chocolate. Stale. No frosting. She lit a match, stuck it in the center, and whispered happy birthday to herself before blowing it out quickly so no one would see. It was the first time she realized that love, in her house, was not a guarantee. It was a reward. And she hadn't earned it that day. Not like Curtis had. Not like Zinnia, who later got her own pageant scrapbook with laminated programs and photo corners. While Evelyn's baby album stopped abruptly at age 5. From that birthday forward, Evelyn stopped expecting the candles. Instead, she became good at baking for others. Cupcakes for Zinnia's volleyball team. Pumpkin pie for Dad on Thanksgiving. Heart-shaped cookies for Mom on Valentine's Day. Even when Mom said sugar made her joints ache, she had learned early how to pour from a pitcher no one bothered to refill. But there was one person who always noticed. Her father. He was not loud in his love. Not theatrical like her mother or emotional like her siblings. But he was consistent. Reliable in a way that built trust quietly. Like a roof you didn't realize you depended on until it started to leak. Every year on her birthday, without fail, he left her a card. Sometimes with flowers. Sometimes just taped to her bedroom door. Never showy. Always handwritten. Once, when she was 13, the card simply read, "You make this house feel like home. Don't let anyone dim that." She had memorized it. She still kept it, tucked in an old book on her shelf. Wuthering Heights. Of all things, he was the only one who showed up to her high school orchestra recital. He was the one who helped her move into her college dorm while her mother stayed behind to help Zinnia with her college application essays, even though Zinnia was 2 years younger and not applying anywhere yet. When he died unexpectedly, at 59 from a heart attack, Evelyn didn't cry for days. The grief sat in her throat like a stone too jagged to swallow. When they read the will, everyone had been too stunned to notice the small envelope inside his top drawer. Addressed to her. No dramatic statements. Just another birthday card unsigned. Unmailed. but dated. To Evelyn. Senshitsu. That would have been this year. The one she'd just spent at a table set for ghosts. Back in the present. Her apartment building came into view. The lights in her window were off. The hallway smelled like someone had burned dinner. And the elevator groaned like it disapproved of late arrivals. She unlocked her door and stepped inside. The quiet was immediate and whole. She poured herself a glass of water she wouldn't finish and sat on the couch, not bothering to remove her shoes. The scarf still sat in her bag, the one they'd regifted her. She didn't pull it out. Instead, she opened the drawer under her coffee table and took out the old birthday card from her father. She read it once. Then again. You make this house feel like home. Maybe that's what she'd been trying to do all these years, make herself indispensable. Useful. Present. Maybe she had believed that if she kept showing up, they'd eventually save her a seat. But people don't give what they don't recognize as valuable. And Evelyn was done teaching people how to see her. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. Not because of nightmares or even because of sadness, but because everything inside her had gone eerily quiet. Not numb, no. This was something else. It was as if her body had reached the outer edge of a storm and entered a kind of stillness. Not peace, but clarity. At 1:17 a.m., her phone buzzed against the nightstand. She reached for it instinctively, half hoping it was some quiet retraction, some last-minute apology. Instead, it was a notification. Zinnia Jennings just posted a new photo. Evelyn's thumb hovered for a moment, then tapped. The image loaded slowly. Bad signal. Or maybe it was the universe giving her one last chance to look away. She didn't. The screen came into focus. There they were, her mother Velma, her sister Zinnia, her brother Curtis, even Uncle Ray, who hadn't been invited to anything since he'd forged their father's signature on a donation check years ago. They stood outside the Marina, a fine dining restaurant in Boulder with white stone walls and oversized champagne flutes. Curtis stood in the center, arms flung wide like he was accepting an award, his signature grin stretching too far. In his hand, a set of keys dangling from a motorcycle keychain. Above him, a banner strung across the glass doors. Celebrating the dreamer Curtis did it. Evelyn stared. The caption read, "He finally made it happen. Number. Family pride number big moves." Her breath snagged. She zoomed in. Velma was wearing the exact scarf they had regifted to Evelyn earlier that night. Pale blue silk. The same snag near the hem. Now, draped around her shoulders like it belonged there. She zoomed in again. Curtis's wrist gleamed beneath the patio lights, a sleek black watch. The same one he had texted her about 2 months ago. Is this too much? Can't afford it right now. But, man, I love it. Evelyn had replied. Wait. Save. It's not urgent. He had said, yeah. I'm broke anyway. Rent's due. Might get kicked out. Aylin. I'm scared. Aylin. That's what he always called her, some childhood mispronunciation that stuck long after it was cute. 2 weeks ago, she had wired him, eins. Wobei. Rent. He said. He was shopping. Celebrating. Using her kindness as currency. She dropped the phone gently on the couch and stared at it like it was radioactive. Then, slowly, she picked it back up and opened her banking app. Scrolled to the transaction. Transfer complete. Tuesday. 10:42 a.m. Curtis Blake Jennings. Wubai. She let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a hollow breath. Not anger. Not even betrayal. Recognition. This wasn't a single wound. It was scar tissue. Layered. Old. Familiar. She opened her laptop and clicked into a folder she hadn't touched in months. Personal records. Inside it, a spreadsheet she had once begun and abandoned. Support tracker. XLSX. She renamed it. Emotional overdrafts. Then she began typing. Feb 2020 kurtis, kar payment 800. Only this once. I swear. July 2021 Zinnia. Baby shower emergency decor, $320. Last minute ask. No thanks. Dek 2020 Velma, dental work, 600. I'll pay you back after New Year's. She didn't. Mar 2019 Curtis, bail money, satu. Lambe. Never talked about it again. Every Thanksgiving since 2015 grocery costs. Prep. Clean up. No one asked. But no one offered either. Every Christmas since Dad died, gift shopping for the whole family on Mom's behalf. Reimbursed. Never. She paused. Not to cry. To breathe. Each line was its own memory. Each number, a small withdrawal from herself. She had spent her whole adult life bankrolling loyalty not because they asked, but because it was expected. Because she thought that maybe, if she kept giving, she could earn something in return. Not money. Not recognition. Just a seat at the table. But here was the truth. Cold and hard like winter light. They'd raised a glass in her absence. Paid for by her generosity. And none of them had flinched. She copied the Instagram photo and pasted it beside the last line of her document. Then opened another tab and searched for familial emotional neglect, adult coping. It was 3:08 a.m. when she landed on a Reddit post. Being the responsible child just means they feel entitled to your silence. The words hit like gospel. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't being too sensitive. She was being rewritten silently. Strategically into a version of herself that they could ignore. Curtis was the dreamer. Zinnia was the heart. Velma. The legacy. Evelyn was the wallet. She closed her laptop without shutting the tab, letting the quote linger in the background. Then she reached for the gift box again, pulled the scarf from its packaging, held it up, studied it. The snag was still there. The perfume faint, but not gone. It hadn't even been washed. She folded it slowly, deliberately, and tucked it into the donation bag by her front door. Not out of anger. Out of truth. It didn't belong to her anymore. Neither did the weight of trying to earn affection that came with terms and conditions. She sat back on the couch, the lamp casting soft light over her lap, and whispered aloud to the silence. You didn't forget me. You just used me better when I stayed quiet. And she wasn't quiet anymore. Monday arrived wearing a gray sky. The kind of overcast that made even good things feel temporary. Evelyn stood barefoot in her kitchen, nursing a cup of black coffee she didn't need. The night before had been long and sleepless. Her mind threading through every conversation she hadn't questioned hard enough. Every transfer she had made without hesitation. Curtis. Zinnia. Velma. They had all become familiar transactions, withdrawals she made from her own spirit in exchange for the illusion of inclusion. But last night had shifted something. She wasn't drowning anymore. She was surfacing. And clarity was a cold, sharp air to breathe. She opened her laptop, scrolling past the emotional overdraft spreadsheet and the folder labeled "Closure is mine." Instead, she clicked into an older file, one she hadn't opened in years. Property 142 Willow Bend. Her childhood home. The one her father left them when he passed. He had split ownership between Evelyn, her mother, and her brother, Tsinia. By then, had married into another state and claimed she didn't want to deal with the paperwork. The home had been left in trust, jointly held. Or so she had thought. Evelyn clicked through the deed documents, her cursor hovering over a new entry. Revised ownership agreement. Updated the 3rd of March. 2024. Her heart stuttered. She hadn't signed anything. She opened the file. There it was, her name missing from the title. No Blake. Evelyn Bissell Jennings. Velma and Jennings. Curtis. Just them. New notification. No request. Just a quiet erasure. The air around her stilled. She clicked the download icon. Her fingers suddenly cold. The PDF loaded clean. Official looking. Notarized. Evelyn scrolled to the bottom where the signatures sat. Curtis. Velma. And Evelyn M. Blake in script that mimicked hers but wrong. Too neat. Too rounded. A version of her handwriting if it had never lived through grief. She stared at it for a long time. Then picked up her phone. It took 3 transfers and 10 minutes of tinny-hold music before a woman named Sandy picked up from the Arapahoe County Clerk's office. Hi. Yes. Evelyn began. Her voice level. Almost formal. I'm calling about a deed revision filed last month. I'm listed as a former co-owner, and I just noticed my name is no longer there. Okay. Sandy said. Do you have the file number? She read it aloud. More clicking. More silence. Yes. Sandy finally replied. Looks like the updated document was submitted in person. Processed and notarized. All signatures attached. Evelyn's grip tightened. Was there ID verification for all parties? Let me see. Another pause. For Velma and Curtis. Yes. But for the third party, it says the signature was provided. But no photo ID logged. Evelyn inhaled slowly. I never signed that, she said. Flat and even. That's not my signature. I wasn't present. And I never consented to being removed. There was a pause. The kind that acknowledged gravity. Well, Sandy said carefully, I would recommend contacting a property attorney. If you suspect signature fraud or unauthorized action, they'll know what to do. It's rare, but not unheard of. Right. Evelyn said. Thank you. She ended the call. Her hand was shaking. But her mind wasn't. Not anymore. This was no longer a story about being excluded. This was a theft. Not just of property, but of presence. Of personhood. She stood up and walked slowly to her bookshelf, pulling out a gray binder from the bottom shelf. A dusting of paper clippings and post-it notes fluttered to the ground. It was her father's estate folder, the one she had kept when no one else wanted to deal with the boring legal stuff. Inside, she found the original deed. Her name. In ink. 3 signatures. Witnesses. A line her father had written in the margin. All parties equal. Nobody gets erased. She ran her fingers over it like it was braille from a man who had always known how fragile fairness could be. Back at her desk, Evelyn created a new document case log, unauthorized deed revision. She began logging everything date of discovery. Screenshots of the current and past deeds. Phone call transcript with Sandy. Screenshot of Curtis's Instagram post. Holding the motorcycle keys. Wire transfer receipt to Curtis. Dated the same week. Each line built a new kind of armor. She wasn't mourning anymore. She was preparing. She opened her email and searched through her contacts for an old referral. Janine, an estate lawyer from a volunteer legal aid workshop she once attended with her friend Mara. She drafted a short message. Subject: urgent suspected signature fraud family property. Hi Janine. I hope this finds you well. I'm reaching out regarding a property matter involving my late father's home. I've recently discovered my name has been removed from the deed without my knowledge or consent. Attached are the current and original documents, as well as supporting records. I believe this constitutes signature fraud. I'd like to understand my legal options. Best. Evelyn Blake. She attached the files. Hit send. Closed the tab. Then sat back. The apartment around her was silent. But not empty. Not anymore. The stillness wasn't passive now. It was poised. She looked at the copy of the deed again. The forgery was almost impressive. They had practiced. Calculated. Planned. But they hadn't counted on her noticing. Or fighting back. And that was their mistake. Because Evelyn had spent her entire life being quiet, helpful, agreeable. What they hadn't realized was that under all that softness was something harder than they could see. A woman who remembered. A woman who documented. A woman who had nothing left to lose because they'd already taken what mattered. Now, she would take back the rest. It came just after sunset. The knock wasn't timid. It wasn't rushed either. It was that confident rhythm that people use when they assume the door will open for them. Evelyn froze mid-step. A spoon still in her hand from stirring the pot of lentil soup she hadn't even wanted. She turned the burner off and moved quietly to the front of the apartment. Heart steady but breath uneven. She didn't need a peephole. She already knew. She opened the door. Velma stood there, holding a pastel gift bag. The kind bought last minute at a pharmacy. Glossy. Oversized. With fluffed tissue paper like a disguise. Thought we could talk. Velma said. Her smile was tight. Polite. Too controlled. Like adults. Evelyn didn't move. She didn't step aside. But her mother walked in anyway. Of course she did. That had always been Velma's way deciding when doors opened. Even ones that weren't hers. Velma surveyed the apartment like a guest, too proud to be impressed. I like what you've done with the place. She offered. Like that was neutral ground. Evelyn closed the door slowly behind her. It hasn't changed, she said flatly. Velma placed the gift bag on the coffee table and sat delicately at the edge of the couch, crossing her legs at the ankles. She looked poised. Practiced like a woman, staging her version of a peace summit. We thought maybe you needed space. She began, smoothing her blouse like it might iron out the tension in the room. Evelyn remained standing. I didn't disappear, she said calmly. I was erased. The words landed with a quiet thud. Velma blinked. I don't think that's fair, she replied after a beat. her tone already shifting from sympathy to defense. "You've always had a place in this family. Name one time you showed up when I didn't pay for it," Evelyn said, stepping forward. "One." Her mother opened her mouth, closed it again. Outside, traffic hummed faintly. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once. Evelyn walked to the drawer near the kitchen counter and pulled out the folder she had prepared days ago. She had expected this moment, not hoped for it, but braced for it. Inside were printed copies of wire transfers, medical bill receipts, grocery lists, mortgage payments, screenshots of text messages with timestamps. She held out one single page. A summary. Revengebytruth. Read silently. Line after line. Curtis. Tsinia. Herself. The total amount. The years. The silence. When she looked up, her eyes had changed. Not wide with shame or regret, but cold. Calculating. Her lips pressed into a line that made Evelyn think of courtroom sketches and photo ops. She folded the paper in half once. Slowly. Like a threat. "No one asked you to keep track." Velma said. "No one asked me to be invisible either," Evelyn replied. "But here we are." Her mother stood now. "You think money makes you right?" "No," Evelyn said. "But it makes me useful. And that's the only thing I've ever been allowed to be." Velma crossed her arms. The pastel bag sat untouched on the table like a hollow offering. She looked down at it, then back up. "I didn't come here to argue," she said tightly. "I came here because I didn't want people thinking we abandoned you." There it was. Not guilt. Optics. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice lower now, more dangerous for its steadiness. "I stopped paying to be ignored. That's not abandonment. That's clarity." Velma exhaled through her nose, her fingers twitching once around the folded paper. "You'll regret this," she said quietly, almost like a lullaby. "Once you're alone, when it's quiet, when no one's there to pick up the phone." Evelyn didn't flinch. She had already lived that silence, slept next to it, celebrated birthdays with it. She moved to the door and opened it. "I've already been alone," she said. "This time, it's by choice." Her mother stood still for a moment, the insult failing to land. Evelyn could see the strain behind her composure, the twitch of disbelief that someone had dared say no. Velma adjusted her coat like armor, stepped past Evelyn without another word, and walked into the hallway. The door clicked softly behind her. Evelyn leaned against it and exhaled, not relief, not pain, just the quiet breath of release. She didn't even look at the gift bag. She picked it up by the handle, walked to the kitchen, and placed it gently into the trash. Not out of rage, out of finality. Then she poured herself a glass of water and sat down on the floor, her back against the cold cabinet. The lights from the street slipped through the blinds, striping the apartment in soft gold and gray. She was alone, but not abandoned. She was no longer living in a house of mirrors trying to find her reflection in other people's approval. She had her own. And it was clear. The next evening, Evelyn stood outside Golden Haven Assisted Living, holding a grocery store, chocolate, cake, and a single candle, still taped crookedly to the plastic lid. She had bought it for herself 3 nights ago. A small gesture of defiance against being forgotten. But the cake never made it to the table. It had sat in her fridge, untouched, aging like a memory no one wanted to unwrap. Tonight, it had purpose. Not for celebration. Exactly. But for recognition. The drive over had been quiet. No music. No podcasts. Just the low hum of her tires and the thoughts she no longer tried to outrun. She parked and stared at the front doors for a moment, gathering herself not because she expected anything dramatic, but because she was learning that healing requires intentionality. The woman at the front desk buzzed her in without questions. Maybe she recognized her. Maybe she saw the way Evelyn cradled the cake. Like, it was more than just sugar and frosting. Some visits don't need explanations. They're written in the slump of your shoulders, the tightness around your mouth, the fact that you show up with something in your hands when words would be too much. Evelyn walked the familiar hallway lined with family portraits of strangers. Every room had its own rhythm, soft television murmurs, the clicking of knitting needles, muffled coughs, and silence deeper than age. She turned the corner and spotted Edith in her usual spot, a wide armchair near the window, bathed in the warm gold of early evening light. Edith was flipping through an oversized magazine with pictures of kitchens no one here would ever cook in again. Her glasses perched low on her nose, and her gray hair was pulled back with a barrette that shimmered like mother of pearl. Evelyn approached slowly. "Hey, stranger," she said gently. Edith looked up and smiled. "Well," she said, folding the magazine shut. "Would you look at that? You're 3 days late." Evelyn held up the cake, fashionably. Edith's laugh was low and real. "You brought your own party, with 1 candle, and no guest list. Thought I'd change the tradition." They sat by the window as the sun dipped low behind the cottonwood trees. Evelyn placed the cake between them on a tiny table scratched with years of unacknowledged visits. She pulled out a cheap plastic knife, 2 paper plates, and the lighter she usually kept for incense. The scene felt absurd and holy all at once. "You gonna light that thing?" Edith asked. "I don't even know what I'd wish for," Evelyn said. "Doesn't have to be for something," Edith said, leaning forward. "Sometimes it's just about bearing witness, even if it's just you and me." Evelyn lit the candle. The flame flickered unsteadily in the draft of the vent above them. They didn't sing. They didn't clap. They just looked at it for a while, as if daring it to believe it mattered. They split a slice of cake, shared a stale cup of coffee, and let the silence stretch comfortably. After a few bites, Evelyn said, "I used to think being strong meant staying quiet, taking care of everyone else, not needing anything." Edith hummed, "Let me guess. You were the good one." Evelyn gave a small smile. "Only when they needed something." Classic. "I thought if I didn't ask for much, they'd love me more. Or, at least, not forget I was there. But they did anyway." Evelyn nodded. "And somehow I still felt like I owed them." Edith leaned back and looked out the window. "I married a man like that once. Everything I did made his life easier. And none of it made him love me more. Just made him expect it. What happened? I left him. Eventually. Not because he cheated. Not because he hit me. But because one day I realized I had spent 15 years folding myself smaller so he could pretend he was enough." Evelyn looked at her, surprised. "Did people understand Lord?" "No," Edith snorted. "They said, he's not so bad. Like not being abusive was a compliment. Like tolerable was the goal. Silence again. But this one was thick with truth. Edith picked up her mug, turning it slowly in her hand. You know, she said, if I had a daughter, I think I'd want her to be like you. Evelyn blinked. Like me. Not soft. Stubborn. The kind who drags her own chair to the table when no one saves her a seat. The words struck like a match inside her chest, quiet but igniting something old and holy. No one had ever said that to Evelyn before. Not her mother. Not her brother. Not anyone. It wasn't that she needed someone to tell her she mattered. But hearing it from someone who didn't owe her that kindness, it hit different. Edith didn't benefit from her comfort, didn't require her silence. She just saw her. Not as broken. Not as dramatic. Just as someone who had stayed standing when no one had offered a hand. Evelyn stared at the flickering candle. The wax had melted down the side in a lazy drip. She didn't feel healed. She didn't feel triumphant. But she felt held. And that was enough. You were never the problem, Edith said. Softer now. You were the mirror. And mirrors make people uncomfortable. Evelyn nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As the sky outside turned a bruised lavender and the hallway lights flickered on, Evelyn rose to leave. She hugged Edith tightly, more tightly than she intended. Afraid, somehow the moment might dissolve, if she didn't anchor it to flesh and heartbeat. At the door, she paused. Thank you. For the cake, Edith grinned. For the seat, Edith winked. Anytime. Quito. But next year. We're doing lemon. Evelyn walked out of the building into the cool Denver dusk. The trees rustled above her like applause, too late for the performance, but still honest. She didn't cry. But she felt something uncoil in her chest. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe just space. And that, for tonight, was enough. The next morning, Evelyn didn't wake up to the sound of an alarm or the vibration of family messages. Just the natural hush of dawn, slipping into her apartment like a gentle guest. For the first time in weeks, she felt no pull toward her phone. No dread. No bracing. She let the stillness stretch out as she brewed her coffee, 2 scoops of bold roast. The one she'd hidden behind a box of chamomile tea, she kept only for guests she didn't like enough to see twice. She watered her plants while the coffee steeped, humming under her breath without realizing it. After breakfast, she sat at her desk, the one by the window that caught the perfect morning light, and opened her laptop. It was time. She created a new folder on her desktop. Closure is mine. The name wasn't dramatic, just honest. She began the quiet work of extraction, not out of anger, not out of vengeance, but because there was no more space in her life for invisible strings tugging at her without her consent. First, the shared streaming account. She logged in, changed the password, then closed it completely. Velma wouldn't be watching Evelyn-funded documentaries anymore, claiming the family loved intellectual stuff while skipping past anything with subtitles. Then the grocery delivery service canceled. The auto-renew subscriptions gone. The shared photo cloud shut down. Every image of smiling faces and birthday tables she was cropped out of archived. Not because she wanted them, but because she might need them. Proof wasn't for them. It was for her. A record of omission. She transferred screenshots of old group texts, the ones where Curtis begged for rent money while posting new motorcycle gear 2 hours later. The email from Velma denying any knowledge of the real estate changes. The Instagram posts with captions that erased her existence while weaponizing the idea of unity. Every message that made her shrink. Every receipt that proved she was never crazy. Never too much. Never imagining things. She filed them all. Then, without flinching, she forwarded the folder to her attorney with a clean subject line. Final documentation for file Jennings v. Jennings. It felt cold. And necessary. She sat back in her chair and stared at the glowing desktop. The folder sat there like a quiet monument not to what was lost, but to what was done. Her phone buzzed. She didn't jump. Just leaned over, picked it up, and scanned the lock screen. Family group chat, new name. Family first ha. The irony was almost poetic. They didn't remove her from the chat. That would have taken intention. Instead, they just moved around her, like she was furniture in a room too inconvenient to rearrange. Conversations rolled on Curtis asking for help with the mortgage he'd inherited. Zinnia suggesting they all meet up soon without drama. Velma posting passive-aggressive quotes about betrayal and loyalty. No one tagged Evelyn. No one mentioned her name. It was as if she'd never been there at all. She scrolled slowly, watching the digital version of Erasure unfold like a script they'd rehearsed for years. They didn't need to exile her. Just pretend she had wandered off. Still, she didn't reply. Didn't flare with rage or spiral into heartbreak. She just hit mute. Then, after a long breath, she hit delete. Not out of spite. Out of sovereignty. They didn't get to take up space anymore. She turned off her phone entirely, walked into the kitchen, and opened a drawer where she kept old birthday cards and sticky notes filled with forgotten grocery lists. She pulled out a blank card, simple, cream-colored, nothing fancy, with a pen that always wrote smoothly. She began to write, "Happy birthday, Evelyn. You were worth showing up for." She placed the card next to the framed photo of her and her father, the only one she still kept. In it, they were ankle-deep in a lake, holding fishing poles and grinning at something she couldn't remember anymore. But they looked happy. Not staged. Not curated. Just seen. Later that afternoon, she began printing out hard copies of the digital records. Not because she didn't trust the cloud, but because something about putting ink on paper made things feel permanent in a world so easily edited. The stack grew. A record of her silence. Her generosity. Her erasure, but also her refusal to vanish. At some point, she pulled out a yellow sticky note and scrawled a reminder. You don't owe them your absence just to make their story easier. She stuck it to the inside of her closet door. Beside the photo of her and her father, the one that had survived all the emotional house fires. Outside, the sky had turned the color of chamomile and slate. The sun filtering through the blinds painted her walls with soft amber lines. No drama. No declarations. Just peace. Earned peace. She returned to her desk, opened a new document, and titled it, What I Owe Myself, Chapter 2. Because closure wasn't just deleting people or forwarding files to lawyers. It was this. The quiet reclamation of your own narrative. The soft, strong voice in your head finally saying, I deserve peace. Even if no one claps for me. Even if no one notices. She smiled. Not a big, victorious grin. Just a knowing curve of her lips. The kind that comes when you realize that healing isn't loud. It's not a victory parade. It's a quiet meal alone. A cake shared with someone who sees you. A validated group chat. A folder full of facts. And the gentle understanding that some families are not homes. They're hurricanes you finally walk out of. The silence in Evelyn's apartment wasn't sharp anymore. It didn't crackle with tension or ache like a swallowed scream. It sat, gentle and firm, like a friend who knew not to ask questions. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, it didn't feel like silence was something done to her. It felt like something she chose. She brewed coffee slowly, carefully, like a small ceremony. Outside, the wind nudged the blinds with soft persistence. The world was moving, but it no longer pulled at her bones. After breakfast, Evelyn reached for a small cardboard box tucked behind cookbooks she never used. It had sat untouched on the shelf since her father's funeral. She set it down carefully and opened it. Inside was a folded letter in her father's handwriting and a worn paperback with the title barely legible, Stillness and the Art of Knowing. He had given it to her on her 27th birthday, the last one they celebrated together. She opened the inside cover. There, beneath his looping cursive, were 6 words. Stillness is where you hear yourself. She closed her eyes for a moment and let the sentence echo in her ribs. So much of her life had been filled with noise trying to explain, justify, soften her edges so others wouldn't feel cut by her honesty. And for what? Not love, not safety, just survival. She flipped through the pages. Dog ears, margin notes, coffee stains. A lifetime of reminders that stillness wasn't the absence of pain. It was the presence of awareness. The space where grief became shapeable, in a space where grief became shapeable, where the voice beneath the noise was finally loud enough to follow. She reached for a sticky note and wrote in quiet strokes. You didn't raise me to break. You taught me how to hold. She smoothed the corners flat and placed it gently on the wall above her desk. Then she opened her laptop and clicked on the document she'd been too afraid to write for years. What I Owe Myself. Chapter 1. The cursor blinked. Expectant. Open. Untouched. She stared for a long time. Not out of fear. Out of reverence. Then, finally, she typed the first line. You are allowed to leave the table when love is no longer being served. The words looked small on the screen, but they felt enormous in her chest. She paused. Let herself breathe it in. She remembered all the years she had pulled up a chair to tables where she was only invited out of obligation. Where love came with fine print. Where being present meant being invisible. No more. She continued. They called me sensitive. Too much. Not enough. Dramatic. Fragile. Cold. Selfish. But never once did they call me tired. Tired of being the quiet glue. Tired of being the backup plan. Tired of funding a family that kept sending me invoices but never thank yous. The words poured out slowly, not like a flood, but like a controlled pour. She wasn't venting. She was archiving, recording her truth in her own handwriting. For herself. For the version of her that had sat alone at that birthday table. For the little girl who once tried to earn her place with silence and saw it mistaken for consent. She typed, Stillness is not the same as silence. Silence is what they gave me. Stillness is what I took back. She wrote for over an hour. Maybe 2. When she finally stopped, the document had grown to nearly 3 pages. Nothing dramatic. No monologue. Just clarity. Just facts laced with feeling. A beginning. She leaned back in her chair and stared out the window. A bird landed on the balcony railing. Fluffed its feathers. and stared into the glass like it was looking for someone. Then it flew away. No hesitation. Evelyn smiled. Stillness wasn't loneliness. Stillness wasn't absence. Stillness was space. And she had finally claimed hers. She stood, stretched, and walked over to the mirror near the door. Her reflection was unchanged. Same face. Same dark eyes. Same unruly strand of hair that never tucked right behind her ear. But something was different. She looked rooted. Like she wasn't asking anymore. For permission. For affection. For acknowledgement. She didn't need to be invited to her own life. At her desk, she opened a new note. Lesson 2. You don't have to bleed to prove you're alive. Sometimes surviving means choosing not to get cut. She closed her laptop, stood up, and placed the book her father had given her back on the shelf. But this time, in the front. No longer hidden. There would be no fireworks tonight. No applause. But that was the point. Some victories are quiet. Some revolutions are whispered. And stillness, real stillness, is where your voice comes back to you. Evelyn booked the ticket on a Wednesday. There was no breakdown. No suitcase tossed together in panic. Just a quiet decision. One way. No dramatic caption. No middle-of-the-night escape. Just a tab open next to her email and a cup of tea gone lukewarm. She wasn't running. She was relocating her soul. 3 weeks later, she stood on the platform with a single carry-on and a satchel full of notebooks. Denver, behind her. Not burning, but folded. Archived. A chapter closed without a slam. The train pulled in soft and slow. The kind of arrival that doesn't demand notice. She stepped on board. Found her seat by the window. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was trespassing in her own story. The landscape outside shifted as the train moved flatlands to foothills. Then fields dotted with wildflowers that didn't ask for names. She exhaled long and steady. The kind of breath that lives just beneath healing. In her lap, she held a small notepad. On the top page, she'd written in steady hand, "This isn't about leaving. It's about arriving differently." The new city wasn't anything remarkable. No coastlines. No skyline dreams. Just a town with wide sidewalks and quiet parks. A library that smelled like old paper and lavender. And people who looked each other in the eye at the farmer's market. She found a job within 2 weeks. Administrative assistant at a local community nonprofit. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't 6 figures. But it was honest. She clocked in. Answered calls. Arranged events. Some days were boring. Some exhausting. But every day she went home tired for the right reasons, not because she was being drained by the weight of someone else's expectation. She made friends slowly. A barista named Nina who remembered her order. A retired teacher who always brought her extra cookies on Thursdays. A neighbor with 2 rescue dogs who invited her on long morning walks without small talk. Just steps and breath. There were no interrogations. No veiled questions about her real story. Just people meeting her where she was. One Saturday, she bought a small pine table from a thrift shop and carried it up to her apartment by herself. One step at a time. She sanded it down. Painted it soft cream. And set it by her kitchen window. Then she added 2 mismatched chairs. Not because she was waiting for someone, but because she believed in possibility again. She lit candles in the evening. Not for ambiance, but as markers of intention. Here I rest. Here I choose. Here I begin again. Sometimes the grief still came, not in tidal waves anymore, but in quiet swells, like passing a certain scent in the grocery store or seeing a family of 4 laughing together in the park. But Evelyn had learned something. Sacred feeling didn't mean failing. One night, she walked home under a dusky sky, stars just beginning to stretch awake. In her tote bag was a new book on creativity and a secondhand mug that read, "You are exactly where you're meant to be." She turned her key, stepped into her apartment, and paused at the pine table. She set down the bag, then pulled out her chair, and sat. No waiting. No apology. Just presence. She opened her laptop, fingers hovering above the keyboard, and titled a new document, "What I Owe Myself." Chapter 3. She typed, "I spent years trying to earn a seat at a table that was never meant to hold me. Now I'm building my own one that doesn't require permission to stay." She stared at the sentence for a long time. Not because she doubted it, but because she finally believed it. She closed her eyes, smiled. The kind of smile that comes not when something ends, but when something begins. Not the start of a fight, not the start of a reckoning, but the start of a self. A quiet, honest, unapologetic becoming. She reached for the sticky note from her father, still tucked in the back of her book. Faded, but legible. "Giving isn't weakness, baby girl. It's strength. But strength must be honored, or it turns into burden. And burden breaks." She whispered aloud. "To no one and everyone. I'm not broken anymore." And the silence around her wasn't empty. It was whole. Like her. Like her new beginning. Like her story no longer borrowed. No longer cropped out. No longer waiting for space. It was hers. And from that moment forward, she would write it exactly as she lived it. Freely. Quietly. Powerfully.